Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion by Microsoft and cubesys on cost optimization in adaptive cloud, reducing vendor sprawl, and maximizing ROIs. My name is Astha Singh, and I'm part of the team at cubesys. It's a pleasure to be here with you all as we explore the topic that's becoming quite critical for all of us leaders in the IT industry. How do we streamline the cloud investments? How do we maintain that agility and security? But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on today and pay my respects to the elders past and present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any First Nations people that are joining us today. Now, let's talk about why we're here. For many IT leaders, especially the technical leaders, cloud adoption has delivered a lot of flexibility, but it's also introduced new challenges, multiple platforms, multiple vendor contracts and overlapping tools create that complexity. So instead of making IT simpler, organizations are finding themselves spending a lot of time and resources to manage that. So today we dive into those practical ways of optimizing all of that together. To help unpack this, we have an incredible panel of experts with us. I've got Dean Corcoran from Microsoft, who is the partner CTO. Dean brings deep expertise on how Microsoft technologies can drive cost efficiency. We've got Shabaz Darr, senior consultant at cubesys. He's worked on countless projects on optimizing cloud investments. And Chris Hales, also from cubesys, senior cloud consultant, our learning and development lead as well, who's got first-hand experience helping businesses simplify and streamline their IT environments. So we'll cover real-world insights, best practices, and actionable steps to get the most out of your cloud strategy today. So let's get started, Chris.
Sure. As we can all see today is a recorded session, so be aware of that. Please use the chat window or the Q&A section. If you have any questions, we'll hopefully have an opportunity to answer those questions throughout the session or towards the end. Obviously, we've got a few different people here, so feel free to, if you've got a question, put it out there, and hopefully we can have an opportunity to answer it during the call. If we can't, we'll probably reach out to you afterwards as well. We will share the content from today's session. There'll be an email that follows up after the session with some links to where you can find the content. So as Astha has kind of alluded to, adaptive cloud is, I guess, the topic, and understanding our cost and reduction capabilities, as well as tackling some of that vendor sprawl that kind of occurs when we start to think about adaptive cloud and multi-cloud. And there's just so many different words that we can use interchangeably for this kind of environment. But I guess one of the key topics today is about understanding what there is, right? And what do we actually know about it, right? Where do we have our infrastructure? Where do we see our life cycle, right? I'm going to open up the floor. This is going to be a panel discussion, so there'll be a bit of backwards and forwards between all of us here on the panel. I'm going to ask the panel members to please feel free to interrupt. Please feel free to step in if you've got an opinion to voice. I think it's important that we keep that engaging. So I'm going to set this up and say that what we should be doing is thinking about where do we have it, where do we have it, what does it do? Do we know if we're doing it well enough? I think that's a really interesting question to ask this group. I think there are sometimes we can do better. Sometimes we don't even know that we're not doing it well or not. And do we know what we can be doing better or what we can be doing, period, right? So Shabaz, I'm gonna flip this a little bit and talk to you and Dean.
Yeah.
Guys, where do you see, how do we create inventory? How do we create, I guess, an understanding of our landscape with adaptive cloud? How can we achieve that? Maybe Shabaz, you go first, and then Dan, we might ask you the same question.
Yeah, no problem. So I think it's a great 4 questions, really. I suppose it comes down to, if you forget about the infrastructure and all that for a second, but actually understanding your organization first of all. If you understand the organization, the structure of it, and the people within it, then you can start to answer some of these questions, because there's not one person that's going to be able to answer these questions. It's going to need people, key stakeholders from the whole organization, because different departments use different applications, use different services and solutions within cloud. So first of all, when we talk about knowing what we have, that's about what applications are we running in cloud, what services are we running, and then again it's going to be a combined effort from the entire business to understand that, and it takes a group of people, not just one person. Your IT team can't just answer this. Do you know what I mean? We're going to get onto some of the things the IT team can do later on in this session, but that's kind of my thoughts on it, I suppose. How about you, Dean? What do you think about it?
Yeah, thanks, Shabaz. Look, it's definitely right. It's good to get a good scope of who you have to talk to find out what you have. I suppose there's a few sort of foundational ways you can look as well. What does the CFO say? What does the financial people say? Because at some stage or another, someone's paying a bill for something somewhere, and that's obviously a good optic, from that financial point of view of seeing what's there. There's without sort of getting too technical, there are ways to inspect what's within your infrastructure, and sort of do an assessment of what workloads you have. Now, think about this not just from a what's in public cloud point of view. Think about it from an on-premises point of view. Running assessment tools are quite valuable in that instance, because because you can see something doesn't mean you know what's inside it. When we say, do you know what you have? It's not just a piece of rack we're talking about. It's what is running inside that. And that's where we start to go down into these sort of other layers here of, knowing what you have. And then once you start to understand what it is that you've got, knowing exactly what it does, it's probably good to take a ground zero point of view as well, and think if you were starting first day on the job, you might have an intuition at the moment about what you think you see as the scope of your technology estate. But how visible is it as well is an important question to ask when it comes down to knowing what you have. It's not about you knowing what you have. Like I put that in there from the point of view of more just getting into the mindset of knowing what you've got. But it should be something that's visible, not just to you, but to the whole organization, and in order to look at it from an efficacy point of view. So if you're starting day zero, ground zero, first day on job, how would you know what you have? So it's the question behind the question in a way as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good lead. Like we can jump down that rabbit hole, right? As IT professionals, I think we all do that from time to time, right? We jump down that rabbit hole and trying to understand every nuance of our environment. But that ground zero approach is also a really interesting concept. If I had a brand new starter here next week and I wasn't here to teach them, how do I give them that level of understanding quickly and efficiently? I guess is also really important in that kind of context.
And I just want to say, because this isn't a small job either, because a couple of things Dean mentioned there, it's not just about public cloud, it's about, maybe you have DCs on premises, etc. These are disparated areas. They're not connected in any way. And I suppose that's what we're here to answer today. How do we bring all those together?
Yeah, and I think that's a struggle that a lot of companies out there face, right? Is, hey, I've got this sprawl of all this different cloud technology or infrastructure technology. How do I bring that together? How do I have a more cohesive understanding of my entire inventory? I think it also kind of leans into, sometimes it's our business needs, right? Sometimes we've got a developer that needs to have something running out of bespoke services in AWS or bespoke services in GCP. And then all of a sudden you've got another business need for an Azure environment, for a D365 sandbox, and so on and so forth. So the sprawl of our cloud and our adaptive scenario, as well as our on-prem, right? We've got people with multiple data centers, with multiple settings, with multiple environments, with multiple configurations. So it is all about, how do I create that consistency across the landscape. All right, yeah, good conversation there, guys. And I think to dive a little bit deeper into one of those next layers around a 4-step cycle, I think one of the things that we find in the industry, and maybe Dean, a question for you here, is how do you see customers operate? I know FinOps is a framework. FinOps is a big buzzword, and it was a huge buzzword last year, and it still is now. I think FinOps is I guess a great content piece around how do we produce that framework inside our business, but how do we break that down? How do we make FinOps understandable and I guess relatable for our IT infrastructure teams and our business? Because FinOps is a business relationship and a business reflection of IT, not necessarily a business, an IT-owned, I guess, component. So when we talk about a 4-step process similar to this, inventory, intent, efficiency, and art of the possible, how does FinOps, I guess, from a relatable context, work for IT teams?
Yeah, and that's why with this step cycle, it's like trying to remove the FinOps. I think people hear FinOps and like, oh no, it's something else I have to learn. And that's why I put sort of these 4 basic steps. It's really just about, knowing what you've got, knowing what it's supposed to be doing, knowing whether it does it well, and then knowing what's possible as the next step. And importantly, keep that as a constant state of being. When to the sort of point of FinOps, and I don't want to like pander on too much about what FinOps is in great detail. Put simply, it is a case of ensuring that the technology that's running is actually running for the organization, and helping you to, as technology management, helping you to have a understanding that this is actually a business function and everything needs to justify its existence. And as technology, if you don't like change, then you're in the wrong industry, to be frank. Technology is always about, constantly pushing the boundaries. We used to work in these cycles. Today, it's more about, at that daily basis. Now, that the one thing that's sort of not hidden here is, and you inferred it before, Chris and Shabaz as well, from the point of view of that, what is the actual business need outside of this? Like, this is a very IT sort of centric view of saying, let's understand what we've got and work out what it actually does. But when you're looking at something like the art of the possible, that is both a question of, and you'll see it in later slides, it's both a question of the technology and a question of what new business direction can you take. So ideally, what we're trying to do is try and simplify this in a very simple sort of concept of just start to get your house in order, start to look at things from a single pane of glass. Don't go down. You shouldn't have to go down every line item unless it's absolutely necessary, and start to have more business conversations so you can actually be a strategic asset to the organization. You can show up to the CEO, and these are figurative roles. If you're in a very small business, then the people who are worried about that their business are doing business, you can turn up and say, hey, I think we can do this business process a different way, because we're not thinking about just keeping the lights on from a technology point of view.
And I think that continuous stream, right? It's everyone knows about continuous delivery, but it's also about continual cost optimization as well. I think that speaks to a good story around bringing those teams and those business units into an awareness of either the cost of technology and infrastructure or the cost of the solution that they're already consuming. Shabaz, I guess to your perspective, how do we empower the business to engage in a more of a continuous cost optimization process?
I think so. I think this slide is actually it's perfect for that question. It's a team effort, as I mentioned before. It's making everyone within the different groups within your organization part of that journey. If we look at what we see on screen now, the management teams, they have that visibility. That's their job, right? To have that visibility over the overarching organization, right? And then it's the finance teams who are going to make the business accountable, because they're the one handling the costs, right? They know what costs are going from where, so they're making the different cost centers accountable for the costs that are going on, and to continue to optimize as much as possible. And then we have the techies, and we are going to get onto the techies. We're very high level at the moment. We are going to get onto the tech stuff soon, and it's the tech and app teams who come up with those recommendations with the information they've got from the management teams and finance teams. Like, look, we're really going over budget on these resources, on these services. What can we do? And the management teams are saying, look, we've got all this stuff coming up in Q3 and Q4. We need to prepare for that. What can we do to kind of get our finances in order, our solution in order, and continue to optimize that? So it's a very much a team effort, and these are some key roles, I think, anyway, within the business that needs to be part of that conversation.
And it helps us dig straight into. Sorry, Astha, go for it.
I've got a question for Dean, actually. I really like the concept of that 4-step cycle, right? And so I want to throw in this conversation towards what pitfalls do organizations face? So in the direction of cost optimization, like what are the challenges and pitfalls that organizations face?
I actually think it's that you get caught in your bubble. To be frank, the technical part of the organization can be quite caught in thinking that their technology justifies its own existence and forget what it actually means to an organization, and also trying to keep the lights on technology that probably has a marginal business benefit anymore. Just because of that, just in case. In fact, that's probably one of the most common things I've seen, is where you've got this database server or something sitting on-prem or somewhere where it ends up getting migrated to the cloud because you don't want to look at it anymore. But it really is the fearful of turning it off factor. Now, we used to make a bit of a joke a number of years ago. It's like, the best way to know if something's valuable is you turn it off and so and just see who complains. But to be fair, you might not find out very quickly, because the way that gets escalated might not be seen as something that that lands as a help desk case or something straight away. More and more you see in organizations, the people who are performing the IT spend are the business owners. They're not the IT department. It doesn't even come through. Technology today is not seen as a technology department thing. It's seen as a tool. If a tradie, as a metaphor, if a tradie wanted a new hammer and the hammer had some IT in it, would they come and ask you about the best IT hammer? No, they wouldn't, right? And a bit of a stretch, I suppose, but who knows? Maybe there is a hammer one day that has some IoT or something in it, and suddenly it's got a security implication. Who knows? Maybe it's asset management. So you can sort of see IT touches everything, but the business doesn't see the tech as touching IT, right? And so they just see it as a business tool. So it's those bubbles. That's why you need to have a seat at the table. And looking at these cycles, like the question here is, intent and how. What is it supposed to do, right? That's a business conversation. What is it doing for the business? But at certain levels, yes, it is an intent of this thing is supposed to be faster or whatever, right? Like you've got a service which, might be a caching service or a backup service. It's but there still should be a business line to that in some way.
Definitely. And I guess that helps us to leverage into what we're here to talk about, right? Is obviously we're a very Azure-centric, cubesys is a very Azure-centric organization, very big consumers of Azure. But how do we achieve this with Azure? I think is one of the best pieces. And I think obviously cost management, as we've more or less been kind of talking through as we've been going so far.
Can I add to this? I think, Chris, as well. Look, I think if you look at something like Azure, it's been built from the ground up for transparency. It's also been built from the ground up for elasticity. Now, I think what's happened is technology people aren't actually used to having so much data, in very, very intimate data about their operations available to them. So they forget to even sort of look at it. And so there's this sort of a case you can get a bit of a cost creep in the cloud. Because it's so easy to spin up another server, you do it overnight. It's another $10 an hour, and you do the math, right? It's, small numbers over time add up to a lot. So it's very easy to turn things on, but that is actually, it should be very easy to see what is turned on, right? And that's the good thing about public cloud is extremely highly granular level of visibility. But you need to look at it.
Yeah,
is probably the main point. It's a human thing we've got to change. So yeah.
And Shabaz, sorry, you were about to say something just before.
It was just touching on what Dean said around, again, just to ask this question as well, that organizations can be very siloed. And that's what causes that disparity between the business. And that's why everyone needs to be involved in this conversation in the business.
Absolutely. And look, Azure cost management's definitely a way to do it, and it can also get you visibility of other spaces. It can help manage AWS costs, for a percentage. But it's not necessarily a free part of that service, but it's definitely something you can utilize to then bring in a separate environment, an understanding of your broader cloud costs, which is just like we talked about inside the cycles, inside the continuous process. It's all about that. And Dean's just to emphasize that again, that visibility piece and gaining that visibility to then be able to share with the business, right? I think is one of IT's functions when it comes to cloud costs. Go for it, Shabaz.
I was going to say 100%, and with Azure cost management, I can hear people probably saying, "Well, this is Azure only." And we are going to get into where this fits into that adaptive cloud scenario. But this is very much a tool for me. Again, it's not just an IT tool for me. It's for like your finance teams and your management. They all should have an eye on this. And again, it's about we don't need to go back to, but the slide where we showed finance. They make the accountability. Management, they have the visibility, and it's the IT team that are going to give the tools, which is this. They're going to give those people within finance and within the management this tool to help them with their roles in making people accountable and having visibility over what is being spent where in the cloud or on premises or whatever. I think this is the ideal tool for that as well.
And definitely helps us achieve it, but it's not the only tool that makes up that solution. No, I think 100%. Is the important part, right? Like, so obviously there is other areas that you need to have good cadence in, right? And I think this is a very good slide for demonstrating that cost management and cost optimization requires a really strong cadence around tagging and understanding how you label and tag your resources in any environment, whether it's Amazon, GCP, or even Azure. Calling out the tagging taxonomy is a clear and consistent manner, making it easy to report against, and also making sure you're having those application insights, defining what those application insights are about, and determining the criticality of that application, its function, its performance, but also its cost. We can have app insights for understanding that there's CPU and memory, but we need to have the same kind of level of visibility when it comes to cost.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to that. We don't have to go back to it again, but that first slide about knowing what you have and knowing where it is. These are two perfect examples of what's going to help you do that. If we say you're using Azure cost management, but nothing's tagged, you do have no idea who's spending what, right? So it's pointless. And with your applications, how are they performing? Only if they're, if you know how they perform, can you size the databases correctly? Can you size those virtual machines correctly? And that's where you get the optimization, because if you've utilized a massive database or a massive virtual machine, however, your application doesn't need it, is not performing to that level, it's wasting money, burning money. And these are two perfect examples of what can help, again, in tandem with things like Azure cost management.
And I think to add to that,
if any of the guests are interested to go deeper into the tech, not to derail the conversation, but we have the series last event on that. So we'll go deep technical, and we'll talk about that at the end of the session, and we'll give you those details.
Very good. And look, and keep in mind that tagging, if you more on the IT side of things, you probably put tagging that sort of relates to your IT management. But I think it's really important here. This tagging from a business lens to be able to sort of say, and I say this at the top end of town sort of point of view, and it's more of a figurative of, that's the sales people, or that, that's a sales service that's used, or that's the marketing service, or that's the financial reports, or whichever. Being able to say, that storage is associated with costs for the finance department or for the outbound marketing, that now means that you have a seat at the table when it comes to any improvements that you might want to make to that service, right? Because you know exactly what line of business within the organization you need to be speaking to. And importantly as well, like I know I've sort of thought it in the past, you used to get departments, and I'd say even to this day, you have parts of an organization that are freeloaders on IT, right? In other words, they have been consuming quite expensive services, and they don't pay a cent towards the maintenance and ongoing costs, right? Whether that be paying for people or paying for the actual, vendor or equipment. So by doing this, it's basically a case of you'd like to you could take an extreme lens. I like to, at least for dramatic purposes, we'd like to turn this off. Who's going to be complaining about it? And when we go to turn it off, are they going to front up with the money? Yeah, look, it's more of a psychological exercise, right? So that you can start to frame it up.
And I think talking to that point, I think, Dean, is important because IT can hold a hostage, right? But it's but at the same time, it's that business buy-in, understanding the business requirement, but understanding the business need, and then showing back. If it's not a real cost show back or a real cost kind of chargeback scenario, giving them at least the visibility of what their cost is, to call out the freeloaders, to call out the other parts of your business that don't understand the cost of their IT needs.
Yeah, and I would say it like this: if you're talking to the CFO or the CEO about the costs of IT, it shouldn't be we spend this much money with Microsoft, this much money with cubesys, this much money with AWS or something like that. It should be, this department spends this much money on tech. This department spends this much money on tech. That department spends this money on tech. It's a very, very different conversation, and it immediately means something to them, and they can totally see the value. So it shouldn't actually be about the vendor, right? That's a different conversation once you've worked out what you're doing.
And it leans into what can be done, right? Number 4, right? It's once we understand the cost, understand, like Shabaz was talking about you can't right size a application's database or an application environment until you know its performance statistics, until you understand its utilization and capacity limitations. That's always going to be a huge help when it comes to then optimizing the cost of that solution, right? If I'm only going to run at a 5% overhead rather than a 20% overhead, if we take an old traditional capacity planning approach from on-prem, typically in the industry, we ran at 80% and we always had 20% buffer, right? It was a typical standard. I think as we go to cloud, I think that typical standard starts to shrink, and we start to see more of a leniency towards more that 5% buffer, because we know that we can flex and become elastic and shift and move as and when we need to.
I think in my experience with this, particularly in the sort of on-premises world, organizations have traditionally over-provisioned. They always have done. They'll over-provision virtual machines applications always, right? Because it's historically been more difficult to track your usage and your performance usage with on-premises. There are tools that do it, but sometimes they can be too expensive for organizations and whatnot. And when we talk about uplifting certain services into cloud, maybe PaaS or SaaS services, it's normally a lift and shift. And what I've traditionally done with clients is say, right, let's lift and shift as it is, but then over the next 3 months, let's look at the let's look at the performance, etc., because there's a good chance we can minimize some usage, some costs, etc. So that's how I've historically done it with clients, where okay, let's lift and shift for now because we just don't have that data to say we need to change the performance settings on this. It's once they get in the cloud, they have the tools to actually see, oh wow, look at this. I mean, again, we're going to talk about tooling shortly and how we can fix that. But I think that's always been my experience anyway.
Yeah, and I think it talks to the scenario of the availability, the security. As you can read on the screen, right? It's that mentality of over provisioning is kind of how we solved some of these issues, but also how we then created a hole for ourselves when it came to actually optimizing the cost of that particular environment.
Again, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think when organizations think about going to the cloud, these are the sort of things they look at. They think, they hear all the great stuff. Oh, we can optimize our costs. We can get much higher availability. We don't need to have 2 server rooms. We can get better security and performance. But again, because they just don't have the information ready for them to use these straight off the bat, it's a question of, right, let's get the applications, let's get the resources in there, and then look at that performance, look at the security over a short period of time, maybe a month or 2. That's where you can technically do the optimizations and then start to optimize cost, high availability, security, performance.
Absolutely. And I think that helps us lean straight into maybe the tooling piece, the tech piece of how we can essentially achieve that, right? I mean, I think we've spoken quite broadly about things where understanding the opportunities that the business might have, right? Whether it be AI or data-driven business kind of modeling and things like that. I think we all have a pretty clear understanding of how we as an IT team have to understand the business needs, understand what the business wants, and then how do we translate that into something that's obtainable for them, but also thinking and keeping in mind its observability, its visibility to the business, its cost optimization. So, Shabaz, why don't you lead us through this slide around how we talk about cost optimization when it comes to Azure Arc?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. And I think I mentioned throughout the session so far, we were talking about the tooling, etc., and some of the problems organizations have. If you do have, resources in other clouds or on premises, as well as Azure, this is the tool that can help with those issues of, inventory, knowing what what you have. If you're in that position where you don't know what you have, I think Azure Arc is ideal because it's going to enable consistent governance and allow you to use the same sort of consistent policy across that. And it's not about migrating things into Azure. These are Azure tools, but Azure Arc is going to bridge that gap for you guys. If you have applications for legacy reasons, they need to stay on premises, or you've got things in GCP or AWS that just for whatever reason they need to stay there, they can't migrate them across, then this is going to help with that. It's going to allow you to keep those there, but have one pane of glass to manage them, be able to see that sort of optimization from a usage perspective and do the right sizing reservations. And another massive benefit I think we're going to get into a bit more detail about is those hybrid benefits. Being able to bring your sort of existing licensing for SQL and servers from your Microsoft sort of licensing across into those other areas and other clouds, which can traditionally be a bit more expensive, right? It's well known that Windows Server licensing and SQL licensing can be more expensive in other clouds. And this is going to allow you to take the benefits that you have through your agreements with Microsoft and utilize those in other areas.
And you make a really good point there. Sorry, Dan, you go for it.
Yeah, and just sort of wrap it up in a bit of a bow. Think of Azure Arc is that. If we go back to those previous slides where there was the Azure cost optimization tooling, right, where you could see all that visibility of what you've got in the cloud. Yeah, that one. So imagine if you had that on premises. That's what Azure Arc is about, right? So it's how do you start to look at all of your technology estate across, regardless of where it is, whether it be in Azure, whether it be in other hyperscale cloud vendors, whether it be on premises, whether it be at a private cloud somewhere, and you just look at it from the perspective of what it represents to the business. That's what Azure Arc is actually about. It's about extending hyperscale cloud functionality on premises and providing that single pane of glass. I know single pane of glass is probably overused. It's a bit of a journey for many organizations. There's many different, potential ways to do it as well. But
I was going to make the same comment actually. Yeah, considering the importance of that consistent governance and inventory management across multi-cloud environments and hybrid environments, these are the actual benefits that help massively.
Exactly. And it helps with the FOMO of missing out as well. I know customers who are primarily, not over 90% on premises, and they're using Azure Arc to provide that management plane. And it does give them, where they need to, the ability to extend in the cloud if they want to, or just to do things in a much more sort of uniform way. It also helps with skilling as well, because less and less people have on-premises skills these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And leveraging Arc to, I guess, emphasize those capabilities, right? And there'll be other sessions that we'll cover are more technical around doing other components. Obviously, today we're talking more about cost optimizations, but understanding the cost of the cloud is still important to even those people. And I think hybrid benefits is a huge piece of being able to deliver that, right?
So
Not a lot
that
of
deep
people
technical
understand
session,
that.
sorry to cut you off, Chris, that deep technical session is about what CIOs are missing out on. So the top 5, sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a really, really good session, that one, around understanding what the CIOs are thinking when it comes to this particular type of technology. But back onto Azure AHub, right, or hybrid benefit program, a lot of people don't understand when they're paying the software assurance how they can maximize that license in cloud technology stacks, right? Whether it's Amazon, whether it's GCP, whether it's even on-prem, right? Understanding what your licensing capabilities are under software assurance and how you can then leverage hybrid benefit to maximize that license utilization. Shabaz, I know you've got a little bit more detail inside this. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah. Now, I'll say straight off the bat, my experience with licensing is that it's a dark art, if I'm honest. And it can be complicated, especially when you have these disparate clouds and on premises and whatnot. But I think this is where Azure Arc really does help you, because all those benefits that you do get, allowing organizations to take advantage of those hybrid benefits, especially when it comes to Windows Server and SQL Server and Microsoft software, it's just going to help you optimize your costs. Because as I mentioned, when you've got AWS and things like that, the licensing costs tend to be more with Windows Server licensing and SQL licensing, and being able to extend that from the benefits you get from Azure on premises is a massive cost saving, because licensing is expensive, right? SQL licensing, depending on what you've got per core or per server, can be really, really expensive. And again, having that visibility of that sort of unified licensing across that multi-cloud is really beneficial as well. BYOL, bringing your own license, for example, optimizing those SQL licenses, and also having that automated policy enforcement from Azure Policy involved with your licensing. And these are just everything Azure Arc is going to extend to your multi-cloud and on-premises platforms as well.
And even that 85% combined saving, right? If you've got reserved instances with a hub licensing from a virtual machine that you've converted or you've migrated to Azure, right? The capability of gaining that advantage of up to that 85% potential saving is huge when you think about SQL licensing in particular, right? But even that I really like that BYOL piece inside other clouds, making sure you're not paying for the same license twice, essentially. So why pay Amazon for the same license you've already got covered in your software assurance? Huge missed opportunity by a lot of IT teams, I find, is that they don't understand the licensing costs they're paying to cloud providers, as well as what they're already paying under their own internal software assurance.
I think something else, Dean, you touched on it earlier, actually, around training. You don't, you ignore that as a cost, but it's a massive cost. That if you are in this disparate cloud where you have some resources over in Azure, AWS, GCP on premises, you've got to train your staff in all those areas to be able to manage them and accommodate that. But with something like Azure Arc, because it's all manageable through Azure Arc, they need just training in Azure Arc. Do you know what I mean? You can do everything from there. And that's saving a cost in itself to the business as well, which probably goes a bit ignored sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. So how does Azure Arc enable right sizing and optimization? I think we've talked about a little bit about BYOL, right? So bring your own license is a big piece of cost optimization when it comes to our licensing, but Arc can also help us with the journey of right sizing and optimization, right? As Shabaz talked to previously around understanding our application environment, understanding the performance needs of that environment so that we can scale up or down as necessary, right? And to get the right SKU size for what we're trying to achieve. And that can help us in every environment, whether it's on-prem or in another cloud provider or even in Azure, right? It can help us with that as well.
And so we've spoken a lot about how Arc integrates with Azure cost optimization, cost management, and Azure policy. And I like to refer to Arc as a bridge. I know it's a boat on there, but I like to refer to it as a bridge. And all the good stuff within Azure, we're talking Azure Monitor, Azure Advisor, Azure Policy, all those app insights, all those cool tools that we use day in, day out in Azure. It's extending that to the rest of your platform and your solution and your services. Your on premises, you can use it with that. You can use it in AWS, use it with GCP. So we talk about that centralized monitoring and insights in Azure. You're getting that with Azure Arc, because it's going to extend all those capabilities. The intelligent right sizing, the automated scaling, being able to automate and use DevOps with all that. And again, we've mentioned the cost optimizations already, but it's not just about that. It's about the other tools that help you manage your environment, that sort of disparate environment.
So if we were to round it out, some of the key benefits. I think it's always really important, and I think we're just repeating ourselves now. But I think it's important to emphasize what those key benefits are of something like Azure Arc when it comes to an adaptive cloud environment, right? Whether that's multi-cloud, whether that's on-prem in Azure, whether that's whatever style and shape or size of your environment, Arc has some really key benefits. That simplification of that multiple environment management, right, and getting towards a single pane of glass. I won't say it is a single pane of glass. I would say it's getting towards moving, because some of the elements you won't be able to pull in, or some of the elements you may not be able to get as well as you could potentially in another tool set when it comes to native stuff like a VMware or the AWS panels and things like that. But it's getting, it's bringing as much information as you can into a single pane. Ensuring that compliance and security consistency is a really critical piece as well. Making sure that we have an understanding of utilizing something like Azure Policy to have a consistent environment and a consistent approach to ensuring that we're securing and compliant with all of our environments. New ways of operating. It's about, like Dean and Shabaz talked about, when it comes to learning and educating our team around how we deliver technology services. Arc gives us that one capability, that one view of how do we deliver X, Y, and Z, and that consistency approach comes into it again.
I was just going to say, Chris, that the toolings that we've mentioned are not just for the IT team to use. As your cost management is, finance management, the dashboards that you can create to give access to your management team so they can have an overview of it. These aren't just tools for just the IT team to use. These are for the whole business, that they can be utilized. So it's it's a different way of operating, 100%.
I had a question for Dean, actually. Is there like a quick update on what significant milestones Azure Arc has obtained in the last year or so when it comes to cost optimization? Any technical milestones?
One of the main things is, well, obviously we're trying to keep it within the scope of costs, so the cost optimization side of things. But one of the main things has been the pay-as-you-go licensing models that are coming to Arc. So traditionally, you purchased licensing, via subscription or via some sort of volume agreement or whichever, right? So it's a bit old hat, I suppose, if you think of the way people like to consume these days. And so, whereas if you compare that to the way that Azure works, Azure is you pay for what you use. And so the challenge with on-premises licensing is that you have to work within the constraints of your licensing. It's very easy to fall outside the constraints of licensing. And so you can get bitten by using too much, or I suppose you're bitten implicitly by paying for more than you're using. So what Azure Arc is bringing as time moves on is more Microsoft on-premises licenses that get transacted via Azure as a pay-as-you-go. And so the Azure Arc agent acts as the bean counter, I suppose, if you want to think of it like that, as like a software asset management tool for the Microsoft licenses. And so it will look at your consumption of SQL, look at your consumption of Windows, and then just charge you for the amount of time that those machines were on. So it gives you that elasticity on premises that you have in the cloud for your licensing. As time moves on, we're going to see more of that. At the moment, it's only SQL Server and Windows Server 2025 that land in there, but without sort of breaching any sort of internal information I've got, which isn't as much as I'd like to think. Just keep an eye out for what else is coming, because this is the future as far as licensing. And look, you don't want to, you don't want to be worried about whether or not you're getting the most out of your current license arrangement or using over what you're paid for.
Yeah, that's right. Optimizing that cost, definitely a big piece of that. All right. Well, as we wrap up, I'm conscious that we're kind of coming to time. Dean, for you, any kind of final thoughts you want to share with the group here today?
Yeah, look, I think at the high level, think at the big picture. My view is, we should be thinking about things from the perspective of what you're trying to do for the organization that you work for and what its business goals are, and then work out how technology is able to provide an answer to that. And you can't do that if you've got, my sort of saying is, you're either stuck under the hood of your car or you're behind the driver's seat. Most technology organizations are stuck under the hood, and you want to be in the driver's seat looking at where you're actually going and why you're going there. And so by simplifying, getting cost management in a single pane of glass, and having a more more of a business financials line of sight for costs that relate to the business and on the business terms rather than vendor terms is really enabled by this tooling.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dean. And Shabaz, any final thoughts from yourself?
Look, we're just scratching the surface of this topic, right? There's only so much we can say in 45 minutes, 50 minutes. cubesys are doing a promotion at the moment where we're onboarding 50 servers free, and doing a cool little dashboard for you. You know, I'm a strong believer in showing people rather than talking about it as well. So by all means, get in touch with us. And I personally would love to show people what we're actually talking about and really get into the deep side of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Astha, do you want to give us a little bit of a lead into what our next event's about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Shabaz, for that offer. Yes, to wrap up, I want to say a few things. So we're going to be sending you guys an email with the offer, with a link to the next couple of events. So the next one's on the 8th of April, Smarter IT for not-for-profits. And then the last one is on the 29th of April, which is the Azure Arc series deep tech session for CIOs. And yeah, thank you, Chris, Shabaz, and Dean for all the insights, your time, and this session will be available on YouTube as well to recap and rewatch.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for your time. Really appreciate it. Great discussion today, and see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thank
Bye, everyone.
you.